Hello there, everyone. Welcome to the Folk Music Educator podcast.
Hello!
My name is Phil Kramer,
And I'm Erin May Lewis.
and we are two online music educators. I teach fiddle, banjo, mandolin, and all that kind of good stuff. And Erin, you teach, is it mostly just mountain dulcimer, or do you
Yeah,
go and do other stuff too?
I teach almost exclusively mountain dulcimer at this point. I also sometimes do kids programming, which is a little more like folk music, general music education stuff, but almost everything I'm teaching right now is specifically mountain dulcimer. How
I
crazy is
thought
that?
so. I just wanted to make sure for our audience. I didn't want to speak incorrectly for everyone.
Right?
And Erin, I'm really excited for you. You're getting prepared to go do a wonderful, fun summer of European travel, and there's festivals and camps and stuff going on out there, right?
That's right. It's festival season. So I've got a festival in Colorado in like a week and a half. And then I fly to England, and there's a kind of week long camp in England that I'm teaching at. And then the next event that I'm doing is actually an online Dulcimer Festival camp style kind of event. So I'll have in person things in the States and in person things in Europe and online things along the way. It's pretty fun.
Fantastic. Yeah, and that's one thing that we've kind of decided to talk about today is our experience of getting ready for the summer and for a lot of
Festival season.
festival season, exactly, and kind of talk about our past experiences and what we learned and how we kind of grew up doing this. And as we were chatting a little bit, we realized that, the way that I came more from a bluegrass music culture where the festivals have a very different feel versus maybe like a dulcimer, which has more kind of a camp vibe. And so we thought
Yeah,
maybe we could talk about camps versus festivals and our experiences with all of that.
yeah.
And yeah,
I definitely went to bluegrass festivals as like the first entry point into communal music gatherings. And then sort of around high school discovered that there were dulcimer festivals that are like specifically for hammered and mountain dulcimer players, and they tend to be structured more like a camp where you're like doing a lot of kind of in-depth learning. It's a lot of workshop based stuff and a little bit of jamming and a little bit of concert, but mostly the days are structured with instruction.
yeah.
And then also, my sister plays fiddle, so we went to several different fiddle camps along the way as well. And so, I actually learned a lot from going to fiddle camp too. And now I think that sometimes it makes me a little bit sad that when we do instructional events, we tend to separate people out by the instrument that they're focusing on,
Yeah.
because I admit that I've learned a lot as a mountain dulcimer player from like April Virch's bowing technique and how she talked about it and taught it at a fiddle camp. And I've learned a lot about like how to play in an Irish session from the button accordion player and the mandolin player. I a lot of my learning has come from people who don't play the same instrument as me. So I that's one of my, I don't know, if I could like dream big and organize something, it would be having a teacher who plays an instrument talk about how they play their instrument with a room full of people who play all different instruments.
Honestly, I think that's a grand idea. And for folks who are kind of trying to find a good way of explaining the differences, or for folks who are maybe not teachers who have just found our little podcast and want to listen to anyway, uh the difference between a festival and a camp, I think, can really be described using kind of a little bit of my experience. The big communal music thing that I did growing up every year was Rocky Grass, which happens in Lyons, Colorado, usually in the last week of July every year. And Rocky Grass is a two-part kind of endeavor. The first the first 4 or 5 days is Rocky Grass Academy, which is a camp. There are artists in residence and there are performances and stuff, but the primary focus is going to be on instruction. There are beginning, intermediate, and advanced for classes for mandolin, fiddle, banjo, guitar, dobro. Rocky Grass even had a mandolin building class that you
Oh,
got to
cool.
build a whole mandolin in the first 4 or 5 days. And it tends to be a lot smaller of a dynamic. Each class maybe only has maybe 6 to 10 people tops in it. And then the festival happens from that Friday to Sunday. And that is where several thousand people show up. And there are a lot of bands that are performing, and the idea of educational programming kind of takes a back seat.
Right.
And that is a lot of my experience going to a lot of bluegrass branded festivals in
Yeah.
particular versus um dulcimer camps that tend to have more of that camp kind of feel, right?
Right, right. Yeah. I mean, the dulcimer community calls them festivals also, but the structure of it tends to be a lot closer to my experience of fiddle camp than my experience of bluegrass festivals, where, like, um, the Walnut Valley Festival in Winfield is the bluegrass festival that I grew up going to. And I mean, they're sort of bluegrass and acoustic music festival, but they have 4 stages going simultaneously with performances from 10 a.m. until midnight,
My
and
gosh.
so it's all these concerts. They also host contests there, so there are these instrument competitions that are happening on one of the stages. But then there's also the like campground picking scene, which goes all day and all night as well. And
Yeah.
the campground picking, the jam session, the like parking lot picking kind of stuff. Um, and a lot of times at the camp kind of places I've been to, both the dulcimer festivals that are structured with instruction during the day, usually they're set up with like little mini concerts in the evening by the
Yeah.
teachers, and then afterwards there's the let's all get together and jam, and so you have this like late night jamming thing that happens. And as much as I have learned from sitting in workshops and specific instruction centric classes,
Yeah.
I think that I've learned the most musically from the jam sessions that I have participated in, and getting to sit knee to knee with musicians who are just a little bit better than me
It,
and pushing me to be better than I am and making me realize which things I don't have a grasp of. Because, when you play by yourself, even if you have a teacher, you have yourself to compare to. And so
yeah.
you're getting better, you're learning things, and you start to think, I kind of have this down. I know this song. Like, I've kind of got this technique figured out. I've kind of got these chords mastered. And
Yeah.
then you go to a jam and you're like, oh, right. I actually also need to practice this and this and this and this a whole bunch, because that grasp I have of it, which is enough to make me feel comfortable in my living room, is not
Yeah.
enough to use it under a sort of pressure situation.
And that I completely agree with you. And I think that's one thing that's um fun about the different dynamics is that the overall philosophy or goal. I'm sorry, you could probably hear my doggies barking in the background there. But um with I think as teachers, we can learn a lot about how we can set our studio culture and
Mm,
understand what works well with one particular dynamic and what works with another. And I know one of the good example I know about this is I got the opportunity one time um, at a festival. There were going to be 2 different events that are happening at the same time. One was a solo performance by Edgar Meyer. That was going to be this like solo him performing, doing a Q&A workshop kind of thing. And everyone wanted to go to this thing. And it was really exciting. And I remember sitting there feeling a little guilty because I'm looking at the program And I see that not at the same time, not too far away, there is a jam workshop with Scott Nygaard and Daryl Anger. And I was like, I really like both of these guys playing, and they were going to be talking about jam, not only jam etiquette, but like the ethos of jamming with someone and what you should do.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, I think I'm going to really kick myself if I don't go see this. And I got up and I left the Edgar Meyer thing, and everyone's giving, my parents and the other bandmates are like, what are you doing? You're making the wrong choice. But when I went, I got to jam with them, and I learned so much about getting to interact and jam with musicians of that quality. And they were really paying attention, because after each time we got done with a tune, they go, okay, what did we hear other players were doing? And we got to do like this group critique in class. They go, Scott, you were doing this thing that was really cool. And he would look at this other fiddle player, go, Mark, I liked what you were doing, but it was a little busy for a guitar solo. And so it made it hard to kind of hear what Scott was doing. And it turned it into a much more experiential kind of learning versus
Yeah.
just kind of sitting on the sidelines and watching someone. And I think
Hmm.
that's a thing that jamming does a little bit differently.
Yeah, right. You're learning it in the sort of trial by fire kind of way. It's the immersion way of learning, right? They say, if
Exactly.
you can study a language in your living room, but if you go live in a place where they're speaking the language, you'll learn it really quickly because you are around people who are using it regularly. And I kind of feel that way about jamming. Like music is its own kind of language,
Mm-hmm.
and you can study it, and you should get a grasp of what's happening musically, and also the way you learn it the best is by immersion with other musicians. That's how you
Exactly.
figure out really why do we talk about music in terms of phrases, or how do
Yeah,
chord progressions actually work, because you're just immersed in playing the music and the
exactly.
style with the people.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
If you, with this kind of dichotomy that we've kind of created, this festival versus camp kind of idea of, what was your most impactful or memorable experience at a festival? And what was your most impactful or memorable experience at a camp?
Oh, this is a
Mm,
good question. Make me think.
yes.
Well,
Ponder.
maybe the same answer.
It's
Because the most influential dulcimer player in my life was David Schnoffer, and I first met him at the Walnut Valley Festival in Winfield. And the moment that was probably most impactful in my whole entire life as a musician was when I was very young and I had just started to play the dulcimer, and I was not very good at it, and I had never met any other dulcimer players.
yeah.
And David Schnoffer was performing at the festival, and through a sort of series of events, including my dad just being bold enough to go up and talk to him, David Schnoffer found out about the Acoustic Kids Workshop that Andy May runs. And I was playing my dulcimer in the Acoustic Kids concert on Saturday morning at 8, 9 in the morning, like stupid early for a festival, right?
Yeah.
And David Schnoffer came and sat in the front row and listened to my performance, and then gave me
No.
his instructional book. And then the first ever like dulcimer centric camp um, that I got to go to is was a festival that's not happening anymore in Carthage, Missouri, at the Precious Moments Museum.
Oh my gosh.
And David Schnoffer was one of the teachers at that camp. So getting to sit in a class with him and just learn from him, um, I think also probably made me fall in love with the dulcimer community and the festival the festival scene in that
Yeah.
way too. And so I guess that person was my most memorable festival
Oh, I
and
love
camp
that.
moment.
I love that.
What
I
about
Oh man, I should have thought about it while you were talking. But
you? When you were asking the question.
yeah, exactly. I think for me, another festival that's no longer around was called the Sunlight Music Festival, and it
Oh, I don't
happened
know
at
that
the
one.
Sunlight Ski Resort outside of Glenwood, Colorado.
Nice.
And small little festival and up on a hill. But it was one of my very first festivals, and I remember it was over July. It was like July 5th, I think, and I got to go and play, and I was listening to music, and there was a lot of great stuff going on. But I was so brand new, and I really wanted to jam, and I really wanted to play music, but I just did not have the skill sets yet to really do it. But one band that was performing and camped not too far away from us was the Sons and Brothers. And if you're not a part of the Colorado music scene, they were a great group. I still think around the Wolkings, and it was Frank Wolking and his sons,
Mhm.
Andy, Mike, and Joe. I think I'm remembering that. I hope I'm remembering correctly. But they were all sweet homeschooled folks, did a lot of stuff in the gospel grass era. And Frank just was so patient with this little kid. And we did jam. They came over to the our campsite, and we jammed, and we got to make music. And Frank was this old guy, and he kind of was like teaching me how to hear what he was singing and play and improvise. And one of my
Oh,
very first improvisation kind of lessons. And have I'm very lucky to have very supportive and musical parents and people that were in our band and all that kind of stuff. But to have another adult, another
right.
person who's performing, kind of reach out and say, I believe that you can do this. You can figure this out was really and that's stuff that you can't really replicate in a lot of small music kind of things. And and don't get me wrong, camps have that a lot as well, but there's a certain kind of jam that happens at festivals that's really fun and
Yeah, and
camaraderie.
at a camp you can sometimes feel like, well, the teachers are being paid to come and teach me. So that's the expectation, right?
Yeah.
When you are in festival or sort of just a spontaneous jam situation and somebody is that kind of instructional, gives you that little bit of tutelage, it feels really extra special because you know that they're not obligated to be doing that, right? They're
Yeah.
choosing to do that. That actually, it made me think of one other really magic moment at a festival was the Oklahoma International Bluegrass Festival that Byron Berline started in Oklahoma. And I think they still do some version of this, but in the early days of the festival, they had a children's tent and they would bring kids on field trips to the kids' tent.
Oh,
But the bands they hired to perform were also all like family bands, all kids playing.
that's so
And so it was
smart.
like a chance to get on the stage, but kids are playing for kids. And we would do this like 30-minute set. And then they had all these crafts set up that the kids got to do.
Yeah.
But one of the really special things that they also did was they gave all of those kids' bands that played on the kids' tent stage backstage passes and access to the hospitality suite.
Gosh.
And there was one year that all and they like specifically invited all the kids to come up to the hospitality suite at the hotel. And so all of us kids show up and we are very out of our element, right? And the Kruger brothers were sitting around a table and they were just kind of playing amongst themselves. And all the kids are just kind of like, we don't know what to do. We're just sitting
Yeah.
quietly trying to disappear into the background. And this magical moment happened when Tommy Emmanuel walked in, and he's like the greatest fingerstyle guitar player to ever walk the earth, maybe,
Yeah.
you know? He walks in, he very quickly and silently assesses the situation, sits down with his guitar, and goes, "Hey, everybody, let's play Bill Cheatham." And every
Oh,
single kid in the room knew Bill Cheatham, and we all got our instruments out, and he like brought us in, and they played like Bill Cheatham, Blackberry Blossom, and then the songs got progressively more and more and more and more difficult.
yeah.
And within about 45 minutes, all the kids had once again put their instruments away, but all of us got to play, you know, and he just created this space where it felt very, very welcoming, and then gradually just got harder and harder. So we all had our moment, and then we
Yeah.
all knew when it was time to be done. It was so special and
It's
super encouraging.
I love that. And I think that's one thing about the kind of talking about the festival versus camp thing one more time is that what ended up being that you're in kind of connecting what you were describing there is that what's nice about the festivals is that there's usually not a way of the intermediate jams, all the intermediate people play together and then all the advanced people play together and all these things. Like there might be some naturally occurring, like the hottest players always kind of do all these things together, but it's a lot more likely of kind of intermixing and people just hanging out for the sake of
Yeah.
companionship and all that kind of stuff. And like I remember one fiddle player who was so good when I first met him. He probably still really is. I haven't seen him in probably a decade, but he talked about, he goes, no, like when the priority number one, like when you jam, you're always teaching and you should always be learning. Like um the two reasons to jam is to learn and to teach. And I loved that philosophy and how welcoming that was. And it kind of sounds like Tommy kind of had that vibe a little bit in that moment too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, for sure.
I love that. And for me, I think one of the best camp moments that kind of blended with that same idea is the band scramble. I don't know if, yeah, band
Right.
scrambles. And for anyone who's not really sure, is a lot of the time what you got to do at these camps is like you show up and everyone says, I want to be in a band scramble, where they all put their name in the hat. They say what instrument you play, what ability level you are, and all that kind of stuff. And we mix it all up. And then people put together a list of a band of like 4 or 5 people and try to
Yeah.
mix them all together. And then you have a day or two to prepare your 3 song set and then you go and
You got a
perform.
day or two? All the band scrambles I did got like an hour or two.
Rocky Grass Band Scramble was something else. It was like like a talent
Wow.
show that lasted the whole week. Every night had different performance of band scrambles, which was great.
That's
And
fantastic.
it was so much fun. And so I don't know. I just think there's a whole the only complaint that I have about the online teaching is it's very hard to really describe the feeling of that communal kind of music.
Yeah. Yeah.
I got to go to Rocky Grass for the first time in over a decade, about a year or 2 years ago. And I remember driving from Las Vegas up to Lyons and going through the town that I was born and grown up in and being on the Front Range in the first time in for a long time because I lived in Nashville and now I'm living in Nevada. And what was wild is when I drove through my hometown and saw the house that I grew up in and my town, all these things, there was memory there. There was some, but it
Mm-hmm.
was walking around the festival grounds in my camp that I really had that hometown nostalgia kind of feeling and
Yeah.
seeing the seeing the people I grew up and I thought of as extended parents with the gray hair and the new lines and all these things. And it that's where I felt that more cyclical part of living and music and culture and all that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm very sad that this summer I'm only going to probably get to go to one or two festivals. One of them was the Las Vegas Bluegrass Festival this last week, and I got to take my niece for the first time and
Oh,
kind of
yay.
show her how the whole thing works. And like, okay, this is what this and boy, I love Nevada. Did a wonderful job at a festival, but it's so brand new and it's run by folks who have never really done or been to bluegrass festivals before. So it's like kind of seeing like people try to teach Spanish who never lived. And
Uh-huh.
it's like, you got a lot of things right. There's a couple of things wrong. And kind of getting to explain, show that off to my niece. And I don't know. I think that is going to be the one big hurdle for us online teachers. And I think if we ever develop the technology or the ability to really bridge that gap, that's where some really magical stuff will happen.
Yeah, I agree. And as I'm talking to my students about, I mean, this is the first year since most people started really plugging into online things that there's also most of the festivals are really happening again and new festivals are popping up, and the conversations I'm having with students who haven't experienced that at all and they've only ever participated in the online music community, there are things that I wouldn't encourage them to try to learn at a festival. Like we were talking just before we started recording, like I don't think it's a good time to go learn new chords and try to drill new chords. I would
Yeah.
not suggest taking that class in person. But a great class to take in person would be like learning a new tune together or learning how to jam together and having those kind of instructional jamming class facilitated jam kind of moments so that you can feel more confident to just go sit down, eat and eat with someone and make music together and be a part of that live creative experience. And it will never ever happen the way it happens today ever
Yeah.
again. And there's something that is really, really special about that puts us into the present moment. And we need both. We need the online instructional
Yeah.
community because there are things we can do really well in this space. And we need these in person musical gatherings where we have those magical little sparks of
Uh,
creative expression.
oh yeah. I would agree. For me, I I don't with my experience, I struggled with the classes that were like, hey, let's learn, Huckleberry Hornpipe or something as a group. The but the moments that really resonated with me were the workshops and the classes that ended up being an experience, like one more of a one-on-one interaction with the person that you're collaborative with, the
Mm-hmm.
teacher, with the classmate, with the other classmates and all that stuff that I felt like a narrative in the discussion of going back and forth that is unique. And I we definitely need a little bit of everything. We need to have that one-on-one time with a teacher and our introspective thoughts, and we also need to go to these festivals. I'll never forget getting to see um Tony Rice. They performed the entire album of Manzanita with most of the
Oh,
original performers, which was
wow.
fantastic, really cool. And getting to see Doc Watson and Vassar Clements and all those stuff. And they weren't teaching workshops, but you got to experience that. You got to experience those
Right.
performers. And I'm just I'm excited to see how this all continues to go. And I will say, folks, for all those listening, still making plans, uh, don't discount the online. Like, don't trade one for the other. Really make an effort to utilize all of the analog real world stuff as much as the online stuff too, because it is
Yeah.
such a fun and irreplaceable experience.
Right.
Yeah.
Agreed. The world needs both.
We need both. And anyway, friends, thank you so much for listening. Erin, I'm so excited for
Yeah.
your trip. I'm going to miss you. And
I know.
Yeah, I we're hoping to get some recordings done, and there might be some opportunities where Erin gets to interview folks at her festival, and I will get to interview folks here in still here in the States and all that kind of stuff. And
Yes.
hopefully we'll get to record again here soon together
I
and
hope
all
so
that good stuff.
too.
It'll be
Yeah.
great.
So good. Happy festival season.
Happy
And
festival
like
season.
your fiddle buddy said, you're always teaching and you're always learning. Always a
Exactly.
teacher, always a student.
Love it. Have a wonderful day, friends.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.